that darkness. And then Psalms 101 verse 3 says, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. So the eye, the light of the body. The psalmist David made a covenant with his eyes when he promised not to place any wicked thing in front of them. It's very important what we look at or don't look at. And so for him, he said, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. And so he made that covenant with his eyes. In Psalms chapter 119, verse 37, he also asked God to give him the power to turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity. Vanity refers to anything that is worthless, foolish, empty, and destitute of reality. There's a lot of men and even women today who are filling their eyes with different things that is just not reality. From pornography to so many different things. And vanity refers to anything that says worthless, foolish, empty, and destitute of reality. Why did David place such an emphasis on keeping his eyes free from beholding wicked and vain things? The reason is that the eye is a unique member of the body in certain important respects. Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 6, we already read it, our text, and then again in Luke chapter 11, verse 34, that the eye is the light of the body. If it is single, if it is clear, whole, not blinded, then the whole body will be full of light. If it is evil, it's wicked, it's diseased, and blind, then the whole body is full of darkness. In other words, Jesus taught that the eye is the gate to the heart or the soul of a man. It is the principal sensory organ that we use to receive information from the outside world, the eye is. And if our eye is constantly filled with evil sights, then our thoughts and our actions will be drastically affected. It's very important. I've said it already, but let me say it again. And the youth thought about coming up here, and I would probably go some different directions than if they were up here. But it's so important that in what we're putting into our bodies. Our thoughts, I'll get to that in a minute, are dictated a lot of times by what we are seeing. Someone that is always looking at things that they should not be, their thoughts are always wrong. And they're always thinking on that. So what comes into and through our eyes that come into our body, really, it does truly affect us. Psychologists have verified this statement, estimating that 90% of our thought life is stimulated by what we see. Also, experiments have shown that the human mind retains in long-term memory 65% of what it receives through the eyes and ears simultaneously. But only about 15% of what comes through the ears alone. As a simple illustration of the impact of the eyes on the mind is as simple as the illustration of the impact of like being able to be an eyewitness of an accident or just hearing about the accident. And it's so different. I've been on both, I've been there on very bad car accidents, and I've also heard about very bad car accidents. And it's so different when you're actually there or have witnessed something tragic that happens instead of just hearing about it on the news or hearing it from a friend. And by the time you hear it a couple times from somebody else, it's gotten worse than probably what it even was. By then, if someone had lost a finger, by the time it got to you, they were decapitated. That's how it gets, doesn't it? But there's something about when you see something. In fact, that explains what, the saying, seeing is believing. And what we see has a powerful influence on our thoughts. A person's thoughts determine what he is. Proverbs 23, verse 7. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So when we begin to put all these things, these through our eyes, into our body, it gets into our thoughts, and we become what we put in. Why it's good to put in good things. It's why it's good to be looking at the Bible. It's why it's good to be looking at things that are wholesome, because when we begin to put that in through our eyes and through our thoughts and everything, it's affected by what we see. As Jesus said, the condition of the eyes determines the condition of the body as a whole. What the eyes indulge in and enjoy is what the body will indulge in and enjoy. John recognized this when he included the lust of the eyes as one of the three major areas of worldliness and temptation. In 1 John, he said in chapter 2, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That's a very scary, convicting scripture there. Just if we stop there, every one of us, because there's something in the world or of the world that we find ourselves loving. It's hard not to really love the world. And here it says, if we love, it says not to love the world or the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of God is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passes away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. I've thought many times the difference. What is the difference? And I'm not sure I really got the answer. But the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes. What's the difference there? And I'm not sure I got it all, but something about those eyes is something about being, when we take something in and it begins to get in the heart and it begins to get in our thoughts. In James chapter 1, it says, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. This tells us that temptation is the first step toward sin. After lust is conceived, it brings forth sin. There are many examples of temptation presented to the eyes which resulted in sin. It was in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, that Eve saw that the forbidden fruit was pleasant to the eyes, so she took it. It was Achan that saw a Babylonian garment and some silver and gold. And God had forbidden the Israelites from taking anything from Jericho. And no doubt Achan intended to obey. But he actually saw these objects and said, then I coveted them. There was something about when he saw them, he coveted them. And he, of course, took them. And not only when we get to that point of letting in our eyes and we see something and we go on and we fall into that temptation and sin, not only does it affect us, but it affects everybody around us. And it was Achan whose family they took. And they took them out and they stoned them with stones until there was a great pile, everybody in his family, because of his sin. Aren't you glad that we live in the New Testament, the New Covenant today? Because some of us would have been already gone home to be for eternity, and that's a long, long time. And our families may have gone with it because of our mistakes. Achan was mistaken, wasn't he? He made a horrible mistake in what he did. God had forbidden the Israelites from taking anything from Jericho, and no doubt Achan intended to obey, but he actually saw these objects and said, then I coveted them. David saw a woman washing herself. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And this led to adultery and eventually murder. It's that seeing, desiring it, coveting it, sinning, that is continued over and over throughout life and throughout history of people that have fallen into sin. Because first you see, and then you take. You see it. Something gets into your thoughts. I really don't know what David was thinking. First of all, being a great warrior that David was, and then he now is home when every other man was out fighting. And here he's all by himself. And I think one of the guys here preaching may have mentioned this, but I really do believe that this was not the first time he saw her. That's my opinion. And I'm wondering if that's the reason why he was home and why he went out there, because he desired her. He had seen her, and the thoughts began to get in his mind, and he acted on what he saw and what he thought. Satan showed Jesus the kingdom of the world from a mountaintop in order to tempt him. This was Jesus, God in the flesh. And when he was weak, fasting 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, Satan came to him, right? And one of the temptations was showing him all the kingdoms of the world and tempting God. And all these incidents show how powerful the lust of the eyes can be. We can probably mark down almost every failure: sin, adultery, fornication, all these things from the eyes. That lust of the eyes. That people see, and something happens in them, it gets into their heart, it gets into their thoughts, and they act upon what they see. The eyes, the light of the entire body. If what's coming in is good, everything's good. But if it's coming in bad and evil, then it's all darkness, isn't it? And so we've got to be very, 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 very careful of what we are putting into our eyes, no matter how old we are. When I grew up, and I know this is going, but this is the truth. When I was growing up, we couldn't do much of anything. And some of that I thank God for. I really do. That has kept me from a lot of things. But one of those things were watching television. And even today, I know that there's been a letdown on that in movies, but it's still all about what you're watching. Even though we say, okay, it's okay to have television and watch television today, it's still the Holy Ghost tells us when we're watching something we're not supposed to be watching. And we've got to listen to that. And how many, just because of the lust of the eyes, continue to watch things that they should not be watching? We've got to make sure that we always listen to that little preacher that is inside of each one of us that says, and you start feeling that, and you can just go ahead and ignore and ignore and ignore until that preacher stops preaching. And then you'll go ahead and do it, because that preacher gets to a point where he knows that your mind is made up that you're going to do it. And the first time you do it, there's still that maybe the heartbeat and the nervousness of doing something wrong, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And that's why people's thoughts are so messed up. And that's why we have so many divorces. And I'm so sick of hearing about people being married 25 and 30 years, and now when one of the spouses ran off with another person, left out on the internet or whatever they did. And it's like, what is going on in this world? We've got to be very careful what we allow into our minds. And a lot of junk on Hollywood and all these things, it's not reality. And you think that I'll go do this and and it's going to be different than the one I've got. No, it's not reality. I would like to get really blunt right now, but I'm not going to. With this going Facebook Live or all that kind of stuff now, I got to watch what I say sometimes. But we've got to be very careful what we're allowing to get in our minds, through our eyes, into our bodies. Be very, very careful. Satan knows that the mind is easily reached through the eye. He tries to bring all kinds of temptation before our eyes for several reasons. Number one, this is a way to bring suggestions to our minds that we haven't previously considered. Number two, these sights get embedded in our memory so that they can return later to tempt us when we are weak or discouraged. This is how our eyes and mind and all go together. Remember years ago when the game Tetris, was it Tetris? And how you fit little pieces together. Anybody played that game? Come on, somebody admit it with, okay. You know what I'm talking about, anybody? And it's just these little pieces that would kind of fall down, and you had so much time to put those and fit those into where they're supposed to be. And so I remember when that first came out, I was so addicted to it. I'm going to be honest with you. For just a little while, when you first play a game and it's so, you're just so, and that thing, and I remember doing that, and I would get down to pray, and all I could see is those little pieces coming down. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how in the world? I'm trying to fit them together, and here I am. I'm saying the words to God, and I'm not even there. And I remember the last time I finally quit playing that game, I was at church. My dad was still pastoring at that time, I believe. And I remember, I just know I was in the prayer room at the church in Bean Blossom, and I knelt down to pray, and I was preaching in just a few minutes. And I was really trying to pray, and all I could see was those little pieces. And I said, I've got to do something here. I've got to stop playing this game, because it gets into our minds. Just what our mind, our eyes are seeing, it gets in there. And that's minor. Tetris isn't really going to hurt me too much except for my focus. And maybe not really, it's going to hurt me if I can't pray. But don't look down on me, because you're thinking about the checkbook, the grocery list. It goes on and on, what you got to do tomorrow. Mm-hmm. You doze off when you're reading the Bible, just like everybody else. I guess. I don't know. I don't want to. But most people I know, they do. But you know what? I'd rather fall asleep with the Bible in my hand than with any other book. Amen. Number 3, I got to move on. By constant exposure to certain sites and their associated ideas, we gradually become accustomed to them. And I've already talked about this, but being desensitized. You get desensitized to these things that you look at. So where at one point it really convicted you, or you had that fear of doing that, or that nervousness of doing the wrong thing, but in time you're desensitized because you continued to do it. Be careful. Be careful. You know what's really been bothering me lately, and I don't know if this really goes together, but how someone can be away from God and it never seems to bother them. Even in a church service when we preach, it doesn't seem to bother them anymore. And I don't know if it's that everybody's saved today, which we know they're not. I don't know if they think that they're a Christian or saved because or whatever. But it seems like, by their life and the fruit, you know that they're not living exactly right, but nobody is afraid or seems to be of being lost anymore. And because there's this desensitization, they're desensitized. I never can say it. Desensitized anymore to that. Whatever that is of saying, you know what, you're lost. You're not living right. I don't know if the preachers quit preaching and then the other live, this preacher or the other preachers, they just don't listen to anymore or what. But there's being desensitized. I'm just going to leave it at that. Amen. Finally, 4. The devil knows that if he can get us to think about certain things long enough, we will act on it. We will sin. How many people have thought in their mind or acted it out in their mind or dwelled on it, but maybe have not yet done it? But if devil knows if he can get us to think, or every thought, and people feed that with whatever, that lust of the eye, however they do that, feed that, then he knows if a person continues to feed that, then eventually they will sin. So we've got to guard our eyes. I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. And that's getting harder because it happens accidentally anymore. We didn't put it there. It just gets there. And we've got to be very careful of what we allow or what we put in front of our eyes ourselves. Guard our eyes. It's our goal, and I think we did pretty good of making sure that our kids did not watch things that they shouldn't watch. Now, I know I wasn't there 24/7, and we pretty much had, I think, control over that, and to make sure that in our home. Now, they may go to a friend's home, and I know they've watched things they shouldn't have at their friend's house. We heard about it later, and but not too much. And thankfully, we had some honest kids that told us. And but guard. You got to guard, and men, priests of the home, women, mamas, guard. Make sure. And so if we don't have children at home, we've got to make sure. It'd be very stupid of me because my wife, first of all, would shoot me, and she's a pretty good shot with a .22 rifle. And so I don't care how far I got it, about a mile away, she probably could still get me. But it would be crazy for me to sit down and watch the Miss Universe pageant, whatever it's called. Now, you think that would go over very good? Women, is that something you just love to see your husbands watch? Now, I've known some men that have done that. And I don't think it's the smartest thing to do. You got to be careful of what you're watching. I'm going to move on. Matthew chapter 15, verse 19 and 20. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands defileth not a man. Sometimes we get caught up in things that are not as maybe outward things. And of course, we know that I'm for that. And people can get so caught up in their little thoughts of something that a person should not do. And sometimes it's those things that are very obvious that they shouldn't do. It's kind of funny, that scripture there. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts. We get that. Murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands defiles not a man. Isaiah chapter 33. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his water shall be sure. And then in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 22, it says simply, abstain from all appearance of evil. Abstain from all appearance of evil. I've mentioned it many times, and you know, I'm just going to hear things that just appear to be evil that we need to stay away from. And my dad was a really good example in so many areas of this, of just staying away from anything that someone could speak of him, you know, that he did wrong, or accuse him of doing something wrong is what I'm trying to say. And it's so good. I mean, we just got to make sure. You know, if I kind of wish the young people were up here today, but you know, but parents, if you have young people, I'm gonna say some things because they're not here. And that is, I've always loved my kids, and I've wanted to trust them, but I don't completely trust them. As long as they're in my house, they knew that at any point they couldn't have a password that I didn't know. Now, some people, they're not going to like this, and they're going to think that I'm too into. If I thought something, I would go into the room, and I would dig into anything I wanted to dig in, because you know, it was Mom and I, and that was our home, and I wanted to make sure that they weren't doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing. I'm the one that bought that phone for them. I'm the one that bought that computer for them. And if I wanted to get in there and check the history of that computer, if I wanted to do, and I didn't have to, thankfully, on that, but a couple of times we did just for, you know, to make sure. But, you know, if I wanted to do it, I could do it. And I should do it. Are you kidding? Privacy? I mean, of course there's some privacy, but no. I think because we've got to make sure. If you've got young boys, you probably really ought to make sure in this day and age. Because there's things today that is so, I mean, they can accidentally get there on their phones. Not even mean to get there in some ways. Or be curious one, or you know, YouTube even. Remember not too long, I mean, it's a few years back, but one time I think we were looking for Christian movies. We Googled Christian movies to watch. And you wouldn't believe what came up. And just doing that right there. The enemy is slick. And he's going to put it in places to tempt people. And they're well intentioned. They had good intentions until that came up. So we've got to be very careful. I love technology. I think it's fantastic. I love to use it. But it's also very dangerous. And we've got our kids today. There's something about you can't unsee some things. And it will come up at the worst times in your life. Amen. My sister and I were walking on our old gravel road, and I'm 4 years older, and she was ahead of me, and all of a sudden she ran up, and this is years ago, and there was a magazine. And, of course, she opened it up. I could see from a distance that it was something that neither one of us need to be looking at, that someone had just thrown out on the road, and I ran and I grabbed it from Carrie, and so immediately when we got to the house, I went straight to my mom, and I said, "This is what we found." And Carrie got to it first, and she saw some things. I just wanted you to know that. And you know, back then it was kind of hard. You know, it was harder to come across things like that, even if a person wanted to. And today, our young people, and if we can hide our heads in the sand and think this, you know, not our kids and not, you know, but I'm telling you what, this is a struggle for men. This is a struggle for boys, and we've got to make sure that and if you're involved in that, and I hope that you're not, but if you're involved in that in any way, you need to make sure that you get prayed through and stop it, get some help. And I know, I'm just going to throw this out here, or if you know someone, or if you have a child that is involved in that, you can come to this pastor, and they can come to this pastor. I'm not going to broadcast it all over the place, but I'm going to try my best to help them spiritually and get them through that, because that is something that people need help in, and we need to make sure. So we've got to be careful that we that we abstain from all appearance of evil, that we are very careful of what we are putting into our eyes, that get into our minds, that get into our hearts, that cause people to eventually act on things that they've seen, that they continue to put into their minds. In closing today, Jesus realized the connection that the eyes had to the heart. So in his sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, he said, "You have heard that it was said of them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell." Drastic measures. Sometimes we have got to take some drastic measures. Of course, I don't think there's anybody crazy enough in here to cut their own hand off, literally. But it would be better, is what it's saying. That if it's something that's causing us to mess up and causing us to sin, it would be better that that member of our body was gone than to have good two eyes and end up in hell, or have two good hands, arms, and end up in hell. So sometimes we've got to take drastic measures with the flesh. You cannot just whimp around and just, you've got to get down and say, I'm going to take care of this. Not half-heartedly, but people that are struggling have got to make sure that they take drastic measures to stop what's going into their eyes. And got to do it. So whatever that is, I would challenge people today. If you got to stop reading certain books, looking at certain books. Now, I know Harry Potter a long time ago became popular, and I'm going to tell you what, anything that's witchcraft and sorcery and all that is not going to be in my house. And it could be the most popular thing in the world. That's just the dad and mom that we were. And I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. Because that kind of stuff, and people that just watch these scary, crazy horror movies, there is no way that is going to come into my mind. Because I've got a guard. That's evil. I'm not saying that, it's going to make you, I don't know, it's going to cause you to struggle by listening or watching those type of movies and things. And like I told you before, I'm not your thought police, and I'm not going to, but I'm going to encourage you. I know in my home's all I'm saying. That stuff's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because I know what I know what seeing certain things do to me. I know what it's done to me in the past. And I'm going to make sure. I'm going to guard, and I think each one of us should guard. Amen. Why? Our goal is to make it to heaven. It's, life and living right in this world is tough enough. I'm not saying because we do it, and there's so many temptations today, and we're doing it, and we're doing a great job. But life is tough enough, and my goal, if I have to take drastic measures and say, there's certain things that it's protection, it's a fence that I've put around myself and my family. I know some people say, well, you're just too protective. Well, if I lived on an interstate, and now my grandkids came over, and we had no fence that, a busy highway, and there was nothing there, and, my grandkids know, and so far they've done well, but we watch them. They know the boundaries where they can go in our yard because there is a highway in front and a road there. And but if I could say, oh, I'm so loving with my kids, I'm just going to let them go anywhere, or my grandkids anywhere they want to go because I love them so much. That is false. When you love them, you try to protect them. And I know we can overprotect, but I think there's certain things that we've got to put fences up and say, the boundary's here. For me and my house, we're not crossing that. Once you get old enough, you can make your own decisions. You can do whatever you want. But for me and my house, we're going to serve God, and this is where the boundaries are. And we need to do that for ourselves personally. There's boundaries. I will not cross this. I will not even get close to this. And if you set those boundaries and you keep them, then you protect the eye and you protect the heart. Amen. How many are going to protect yourself a little bit there? Your eye. Make sure. How many are going to make it to heaven? You're here for a reason. I know you're here on a Wednesday night for a reason, because you want to make it to heaven. Stand with me right now. And why don't we just lift our hands up and just talk to him right now. Tell him that you are serious about this. You'll take drastic measures. You're going to do whatever it takes. God